Welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast, where we're joined by your hosts, Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. In each episode, we'll be sharing valuable insights and tips to help you turn your NDIS business into a profitable venture. So whether you're just starting out or looking to take your business to the next level, you've come to the right place. Let's stop surviving and start thriving.
G'day everybody and welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast. My name is Paul and I'm here with my amazing co-host Tania. G'day Tania.
Hi, how are you today, Paul?
Very good, thank you. Hey, today we're going to dive into something that is probably on a lot of people's minds at the moment, a lot of change happening. We're going to look at pivoting your support coordination business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am getting asked constantly from support coordinators about what they can do, how do they diversify, what's the future look like for them? And obviously we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know if support coordination is going to be ending now, soon, next year, 3 years, 5 years. We do know that mandatory registration will be around the July mark. We do know that they're going to have 3 months to do an application and then 12 months to go through an audit process. But the big question that I've been asked is, well, what's the future? What's the future of support coordination? Should I go through the registration process? And if I'm going to spend $10,000 getting registered, should I be registering for other things too? So that I, if support coordination does go away, there's actually value in the registration that I have, so that I can either, continue running a business in another area or potentially sell that registration to somebody else who might use it. So it's an asset, because let's face it, $10,000 to go through the audit process, thinking that maybe it's a 1 to 3 to 5 year plan is quite a large investment. I'm not sure there's a return on that investment in the short term.
It's quite an interesting space because, there are, obviously companies who are, multifaceted. They do direct supports, they do support coordination, they do plan management. But then the firms that are solely support coordination have a lot of decisions to make. And as you rightly mentioned, is registration worth it for them? What is that time frame? The crystal ball hasn't been working terribly well for us lately to be able to see what is going on. So I think a lot of it really starts from evaluating what your plans are as a business and where you're going. I think have you seen much around this new thing that they've brought out around the grants and tenders that have been happening?
Yeah, look, I have seen the support coordination grant out. It's invite only though, so invited a handful of very large providers. And I have a lot of support coordination clients, and out of all of the clients I have, only one of them got the invite. It's confidential, so I can't say who that is, but only one out of all the clients that I have in support coordination. And I think, that for me kind of gave a really clear signal potentially. Maybe I'm catastrophizing, but if I was a support coordinator, I think I would be looking to diversify. And I guess if I give some context to that, when I was working in an RTO, in a registered training organization in college, we received millions of dollars of government money each year. And overnight, the government turned off that funding scheme. So overnight, I had 20,000 students. I had colleges all over, campuses all across Australia. And I spent about a month of my life traveling to each campus, making people redundant because we lost funding. And I'm kind of scarred and traumatized over that experience. It was really hard. It was our students had to find new providers. They'd done work, and they'd paid money for a course they weren't going to receive credits for. I can't tell you how many assignments I marked myself at 3 a.m. to try and get them as much credit as I could, because everyone was made redundant because the funding had stopped. It was really a really tough period. And it was only out of coincidence or luck. I'd love to say I was that strategic, but about 6 months before this, I'd applied to be an international college, and our registration came through about a week before this happened. So we had an income stream we could pivot to, although it's a different target market, a different client, different registration. We had another way, and we could pivot to something and have another income stream, although it was not near as much money. And so because of that, I'm really not trusting of the government and government funded buckets of money. I think that not having some kind of business diversification can just be the nail in your coffin. And so because of that experience, and I've seen it in other schemes as well, that I just really think everyone needs to have multiple sources of income. And so some of my providers might not do other things outside of NDIS, but some of them sell merch as another income stream.
Yep.
Some of them do supports in, aged care or CHSP or other funding buckets so that they're diversifying some of that risk. But I think for support coordinators specifically, the hang up or the challenge is that they've really loved the independence and the no conflict of being an independent support coordinator. And they truly believe that support coordination should be independent. So if I'm to identify the biggest challenge for support coordinators, it's actually that mindset shift of, is it ethically okay for me to pivot? Is it ethically okay for me to run another service with support coordination? I'm a support coordinator. That's my identity. That's the job I love to do. I'm great at that job. How do I now start delivering another support? And I think that's really the underlying question that I've been getting a lot in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I know for so many providers for support coordinators who have stepped into that space, they're going, no, we're just going to do this so that we can be independent, so that we can be, just provide this clear support to our clients. It's what's been one of their key things that has set them apart from other support coordination firms, is that we're not conflicted. We're not going to be providing supports. We're just going to do this, and probably also, psychosocial recovery coaching added into that, at that level. But it really does create a bit of a choice, as we've said, like what is next? How do we look at these diversifying options? What are some practical steps? You mentioned, for instance, the aged care and home care. What are some practical steps that someone could take to start looking into what their next step could be, or their future? How would they go about making these decisions?
So for me, it all comes down to that concept of ikigai, that Japanese pie symbol. You've got those three sections. What are you great at? What does the world need? And what's the third one? What are you great at? What the world needs, and what
can
someone
get paid for?
Yeah. Those three need to overlap. So I've been asked this by really countless numbers of support coordinators, and every time it does start with, well, what do you love to do? What are you great at doing? And how can we fund that in the NJS or outside the NJS? How do we sell that? And so some of the clients I work with do things like, well, I'm really passionate about, I've been working with children, and a lot of my clients as for support coordination are actually children. They're the ones I like to work with the most. So we've explored, okay, well, can you do the key worker role, which is very similar to support coordination, underneath the early intervention line item instead? I had someone who was a teacher by background who's really liked working with clients. So she's decided to become a behavior support practitioner and go through the self-assessment process to become a behavior support practitioner, because she feels, one, that's a good use of her skills. She feels it's much more secure. It's also a very higher paying per hour or per item rate. And she feels that the current clients she works with don't get enough service in that area. So I think the real benefits for a support coordinator is that they know their clients really well, and they have a lot of data about the other services their clients need in their plans. So from a purely business perspective, what I would do is get all of those metrics of all of the plans of all of the clients I've supported over the past however many years you've been in operation, and look for trends. Have a look at the clients who've come to me. How many of them have SIL in their plan? How many of them have SDA? How many of them have allied health? How many of them have A, B, and C? And then out of those, where's the demand and where's the gap? What can you do better? The support coordinators really have a great idea about, in their local area or in their area they operate, who's great and where are the gaps? Where are the service gaps that they can't find for their clients that they really need? And can they fill that gap? Is that something that would, light them up, that they'd be really good at, that their clients would benefit from? And if you can get that win-win-win, then that's potentially an area to start to move into, as opposed to staying as an independent support coordinator and potentially being left behind.
Yeah, 100%.
What about you, Paul? What have you seen, and what conversations are you having with your clients around, are you advising them to do things like pivoting into disability support work or allied health, or, what other suggestions do you have around that, managing or maintaining that business sustainability?
Yeah, look, it's definitely come up quite a few times for people that are both, operating independently, and also people that are operating as a part of their business, that, as you mentioned before, like, where are the patterns? If you zoom out far enough, everything has a pattern. And we can start to see the idea of, right, if we're working in this sort of space and a lot of clients are in this other sort of area, or they're heading in this direction, what's the next thing that's needed? And it's not always just, direct supports. As you mentioned, like there's allied health services and those sort of things available, or even, moving into home care. I had a great conversation with a couple of support coordinators just recently who, as you mentioned, like really into working with children and early intervention. And they're in the process of actually creating a small team and moving into childcare. And so with that space that they have a network, they have the ability to, work with children with special needs and bring in the right people and connect them with the right facilities. A childcare center was actually already on their radar as a possibility because of the type of people that they're working with. But then we can look at, when you're thinking about people who may have, different types of abilities, is allied health a space that you would be looking at getting into? And rather than, you're not a physio, but maybe you could facilitate a multidisciplinary facility that is going to allow people to get what they need, and not just the line item, but what is the other supports that you can offer as a part of your service because of your support coordination skill set? Then we start to look into things like, if, pushing forward in this type of probably more in-depth business model isn't your thing, well, as businesses grow, there is needs for people with skill sets like support coordinators to then come into other businesses in the area of probably service coordination, operations management, and these roles that your skill set can actually transfer across to quite comfortably.
Yeah, I like the idea of the allied health one, but I like it for a few reasons. And I mean, disability support work as well, because I think it's a lot of transferable skills there. As a support coordinator, you are coordinating those supports, and you might not necessarily be doing the clinical intake and actually booking those services. But there's not a huge leap, at least in my eyes, between the coordination of supports and actually making the booking in for an OT to do that. You still, the support coordinator would do the usual intake, learn about them, figure out their goals. And then instead of just referring them to an allied health provider, actually then having the facility to be able to book them into those diaries kind of makes sense to me. It kind of is only an extension of the current service. It's not completely different. And I kind of think that for disability support work as well. And actually, a lot of support coordinators have a team of independent support workers that they already send shifts to. So it's not really a huge deal then to actually start offering that as a service, and instead of having them as independent support workers, actually have them on your books. There's obviously more compliance in that, and it's a different employer arrangement, and there is things that you need to set up. But the skill set and the job itself isn't dramatically different.
That's correct. And there's lots of room for providers to move into that sort of space because of the network that support coordinators often have.
Yeah.
There's room for, as you mentioned, like bringing team on and then actually doing those direct supports. But, we've mentioned before about the opportunities of actually, acquiring businesses and being at the helm of a business that is actually operating well, and whether it's being in partnership or merging with a business to then provide a different type of support or a different level of support. And whether it's businesses that create groups that maybe are, direct support, coordination, and allied health. So it's really interesting to see the options that actually are ahead of them. But as you mentioned before, it's about choosing what you're actually interested in and passionate about, because then you'll be able to be probably more creative with the options that you're going to run with.
Yeah.
We have got the new home care scheme coming out in July. What are the key differences and similarities for support coordination, and how can they possibly utilize that as a new area for growth?
Yeah. So I did a webinar recently about the home care changes that are coming in. And one of the things that really stood out to me was there is a role that is basically a support coordinator in that scheme.
Mm.
There is a qualification requirement around that. And I've forgotten the name. I think it's something like care planner or plan carer. Something that is actually this idea of coordinating the different services that support consumers, I think they call them, or older people. And so I think that's really worth having a look into, and having a look, if you are a support coordinator, is there a role there where you could coordinate the supports under that scheme, and what does that look like for you as an organization? How do you pivot or shift your current networks to be able to support older people as well as people with disability? And I think it's definitely worth having a look at. I think the skills seem very transferable,
Yeah,
and the network, because I believe most NDIS providers are going to want to pivot to home care as well. So potentially the network that you've built is also transferable.
yeah, fantastic. There is really quite a few options for people to start to look at, but I guess now is really the time to start being very proactive about what your possible options are and start making those decisions, start having those conversations and seeing what your options are moving forward so that you can have a plan in place. Because what we don't want is a bundle of amazing support coordination companies and people get to a point where they just go, oh, this is not really where I want to be operating anymore. And then they maybe just decide to leave the space or something like that, because there's so much value in what that skill set offers, that there should be somewhere that they could be operating and providing a level of support to the people that they love working with, just maybe in a different format or a different role.
Yeah. And I guess I agree. I think it would be such a shame to lose all of those skill sets. But I do think sometimes we stay in roles and in industries longer than we should as well. So this might be a wake-up call for someone to think, actually, I've been doing a support coordination role because my brother, sister, cousin, told me it was a good idea. It's been a really fun ride. But, maybe they have a bigger dream. Maybe there's something else they wanted to explore, and maybe it's time for them to use this as an opportunity to reinvent themselves. And the reason I say that is that I had this big conversation with a client of mine who's a great support coordinator. And, I was very much saying, don't leave the industry, do something else, keep your skills here. You're so great at it. But she's so great because she has children with disability. She's so great at it because she's empathetic and caring. She used to be a teacher, so she just, she adores children. She wants to give. But she was like, I think I'm going to go back to teaching. And I was like, oh, at first I was like, well, that's such a shame for the industry. It's probably such a benefit for the school that
Benefit for the school that she goes to. Yeah, absolutely.
and she's going to bring so much maturity and skills and knowledge about how to work with children with disability inside school settings that isn't there often. And I have a really good friend of mine who spent about 5 years being a plan manager. And when she left the sector, she went back to an office management role. She fell into plan management kind of by mistake, and did it for 5 years and absolutely loved it. But she was part of a plan management company that got absorbed by somebody else. And she had a lot of guilt and shame about plan management not working and being like, I failed as a plan manager. But she wouldn't fail. She was a great plan manager. And she cared deeply about her participants. But her whole company got acquired and they all got made redundant. So it wasn't that she wasn't great. And I just want to, I guess, put it out there that just because something's ending doesn't actually mean you failed or that it's bad. At some point, it might be the end of the road. And I find it funny that sometimes we talk about, a failed business. So if you've had a business and it hasn't worked, you have this stigma about, I've had a failed business. But I really think that we wouldn't say that about a job. right? We wouldn't say, oh, like the first job that I worked at was a childcare center. I don't say that that failed because I left and moved on to my next job.
Yeah.
I learned skills there. I got valuable lessons there. I learned a lot, and then I can apply those skills in my next job. And so I guess I just want to put out there that there is someone that's listening to this that is like, I've only do support coordination, and now I'm going to have to leave this and do something else. Well, you've got a lot of skills. Think about all the amazing skills you've learned that you're going to be able to apply anywhere. And it's not a failure. It is just time for a new adventure.
I love that. Time for a new adventure because, as you said, the skill sets are there, and support coordination is one of those things that connects you with a lot of people. And being able to, go to your network and see what is actually out there could actually prove some new opportunities for you. But you're exactly right. It's not a failure, because I feel like failure is almost a rite of passage for most entrepreneurs, is to do something, learn some skill sets, take those skill sets onto the next thing and do something else awesome. Right. And you can learn so much from every stage. So it's no longer a failure or something that didn't work, but it is, I got this out of this process, and now I am better because of it. And it allows me to now have this skill set, which I can take into my next thing. So love it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think it's funny how we also equate time with success. It's like if you had a 1-year business, somehow that's less successful than if you had a 20-year business, right? But you have a 20-year business that didn't make a profit at all, and you can have a 1-year business that was awesome. So I think it's also like just that perspective of what's actually success for you. And if success for you is that you were a great support coordinator for the last 10 years and you helped X number of participants live better lives, then that's success. Let's just call it a win and take those skills and apply them wherever else you really want to do, and keep using your skills, as opposed to going, right, this is actually going to be a knock on confidence. I'm not a good business person. Maybe I shouldn't have started a business. Maybe I shouldn't do it again. And I see that quite a lot, that specifically women go and start a small business. They don't get the success they thought they would get, whether financially or whatever else. And then they give up and go back to working with someone else and sell their soul for $1. And I kind of think that, if you want to be in business, the failures are just so important as well as the win. And there's really no failure. It's all learning, right? You just learn and keep going.
All learning. Yeah. We've got a great process to have my clients through is, what are your wins and lessons? Because if something doesn't work, then you learn something. It wasn't a failure. You learned something. What's the lesson that we learned that we're now going to apply and not have to learn that one again? Right. And we just have so many options as people with skills that grow over time. And to any support coordinators that are currently toying with these ideas, there are lots of options ahead of you. And, there is still uncertainty. And so we're looking at all the different options that are available, but have those conversations, meet the people that are, going to be, part of your network, regardless of, whether it's support coordination or whatever it is. Look into the options that are ahead of you. Is it allied health? Is it, leaning more into what you're doing right now? Is it direct supports? Is it childcare? Is it going back to a previous job? Is it going online and selling merch and all that sort of stuff? Is it opening a fish and chip shop because you always wanted to do a fish and chip shop when you were younger? Any number of things that could be done, right?
Yeah. And I think when you have that mindset, you're shifting it automatically from this is being done to me to I have so many options. And I kind of think you have to do that within a window, because the closer we get to mandatory registration, or the closer we get to navigators, the more pressure you have to move quickly. So if you can use the next 6 months to really think about, what do I want to do? What success look like for me? What would I love to wake up and do every day, and start to shape towards that? Then when these changes happen, you've made choices and you've been in control of them, as opposed to the government, forcing you to make a choice and forcing your hand. And for me, having control over what I do and having that power within me is just so important. It really does it really does make a difference in my happiness and, how I interpret things. So I'm assuming that's the same for everyone. I know I'm sometimes a little bit different, but I'm assuming that the more empowered you are to make the decisions, the happier you are with the outcomes.
Absolutely. There is so much freedom when you can look at where you're at right now and go, where do I want to go? I have options, and you do have options, right? As you said, the longer you do leave, just even looking at things, pressure starts to build. And so this is a great time to be going, right, let's actually just sit down. If I want to do something for the rest of my life, what's it going to look like? If I want to do something for the next 5 years, what does it look like? If I want to take a break for a few years and just chill out, maybe that's an option for you. But having that empowerment, the ability to go, this is my direction that I'm going in, that I get to choose and I get to plan out, is really empowering. It is a blessing to you and is something you're going to be able to enjoy for a very long time, regardless of what happens. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We've had a bit of a conversation around this idea of the things that are happening in the support coordination space. We'd love for you to join us on our next episode and chat with you soon.
Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast with Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. We hope you found today's episode informative and valuable. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating, and share it with others who could benefit from our insights. Until next time, keep thriving.